Netflix's Castlevania series is so fucking cool, holy shit. I make that statement both as a fan of the Castlevania video game series and as a fan of animation, televised or otherwise. Despite the first season's very short length, there's a lot I could talk about, but for now, I just want to focus on how this show succeeds as an adaptation of a video game. Up until now, video games have been notoriously poor source material for adapting into movies and TV shows. Only one good movie that I know of has ever been made based on a video game, and that one only because Ace Attorney is narrative focused to begin with. As for TV shows, aside from a couple of visual novel adaptations and Pokemon, I guess, nothing. It's no secret why all of these adaptations fail. Games are an interactive medium, and movies and TV shows are not. Interaction is the primary appeal of games, so when you take away that element when translating it into another medium, what are you left with? Not much. Only blank slate characters and a story that at best simply moves along as a means of player progression. What these adaptations need to do then, and what most fail at, is flesh out the characters to rise above their video game counterparts and rework the narrative into something meant to drive not the player forward or contextualize the player's actions, but rather something that explores how the characters create and or go through their own journeys. On both of these fronts, the Netflix Castlevania series succeeds, so let's take a closer look and see exactly how that happened. First, characterization. In Castlevania III, from which the Netflix series draws heavily, the player character, Trevor Belmont, was not a character so much as he was a player avatar. He never spoke and had no personality to speak of. The Netflix series' first major triumph is taking this blank slate and transforming him into a distinct and relatable character. How was this accomplished? By giving Trevor a history that still affects him, and a personality that includes dry humor and a budding sense of duty. In this series, the Belmont family is hated and very nearly extinct, instilling in Trevor a personal tragedy that follows him through the series. This has the effect of making him more sympathetic than he would have been without that backstory. In the games, that the Belmonts were disliked was merely a tiny piece of flavor text that was easy to miss, and didn't matter much in the context of the game when the player was just whipping dudes. The Netflix series took this obscure piece of lore and expanded it into a critical aspect of Trevor's character. This is how you adapt a story, taking a nothing element and transforming it to work well and be important in the new medium. If they had stuck to the source material, as it were, and just mentioned the Belmont family in passing, Trevor would have been just another dude. But they changed it, expanded it, and gave him a history that elicited sympathy from me. They made him a character. They adapted an avatar into an actual character. It also helps that Trevor delivers some genuinely funny lines. He's not one of those overly witty types who has a crack for every situation, but rather he has a healthy balance of knowing when to be serious and when a clever line might be appropriate. To backpedal a little, Trevor may be the main character, but he's hardly in the first episode. The first episode is all about the big D-man himself, Dracula, and I adore how this series handled him. See, in Castlevania III, which the Netflix series claims to be an adaptation of, Dracula was also not a character. He was just a bad guy, the bad guy, and that holds true for most of the games in the series. Dracula is almost never a character in his own right. He's just the final boss, a force of pure evil to be overcome. In the show, he's still a force to be overcome, but I have a harder time labeling him evil, and moreover, his motives for doing what he does A, exist in the first place, and B, are perfectly understandable. What the first episode does that takes Dracula beyond what he is in the games is humanize him. Ironic, considering he's out to kill all humans, but just what it does. We first see him at a time when he's not evil and out for blood, and we see him start a relationship like he's any other person. The show's very first action is showing how, for lack of a better term, normal Dracula can be. He's not evil, he's just some guy with lots of power and knowledge, desperate to connect to someone. And when the single most important connection he's ever made is suddenly and forcibly taken away from him, it'd be weirder if he wasn't angry. Instead of Dracula being ripped straight from the games and just being evil, he's an angry and sad man whose motivations for slaughtering everything are understandable, if not entirely justifiable. To be fair to the games, the story of Dracula's wife being burned at the stake was lifted straight from Symphony of the Night. But that game was about Alucard, and the story of her burning was presented as part of Alucard's backstory. It was about how her burning affected Alucard, and Dracula hardly had a say. He had a bit to say about it after the final battle, but until then he was still just the bad guy to be beaten. And even after that, Dracula doesn't say much substantial to make you feel for him. In the Netflix series, conversely, the entire first episode is about him, so you do get to feel for him before he starts with the slaughter. Adapting characters is not all the Netflix series did well. It also took games whose story existed merely to contextualize the player's actions, with tiny bits of lore sprinkled here and there, and transformed it into a decently compelling narrative. I already talked about how this series took the tiny bit of lore about the Belmont family from the games and transformed it into a compelling backstory for Trevor, which itself is really cool. Now let's look at how the show makes a narrative out of a game with almost none. And actually, this is the part where I talk a bit about the show's shortcomings. Most of the first season is essentially setup. A lot of important stuff happens in episode 1, and the following 3 episodes, viewed through the lens of Trevor Belmont, are about the consequences of the events of episode 1. By the end of episode 4, the major characters have all gathered, ready to set out on the quest to slay Dracula, which is what the games are about, and then it ends. This has the effect of making the show feel like it ended just as it was getting started. This can be attributed to the fact that there are only 4 episodes, and thanks to all that, one would be forgiven for thinking a whole lot of nothing happened. But that's only if you go by the metric of the games. That is to say, no progress was made towards stopping Dracula. In reality, by fleshing out its setting, the series actually had a lot going on in those 4 episodes, but because that setting felt so divorced from the typical setting and narrative progression of the games, it's easy to feel the absence of a Castlevania-ness in this Castlevania series. The latter 3 episodes have Trevor in a town affected by Dracula's nightly army of terrors, where religious extremists have taken over and are making scapegoats out of recently settled nomads, and that's the stuff that takes up the bulk of the show's runtime. This story doesn't have a whole lot to do with the Castlevania games as we know them, but it does serve to bring the main cast together, and moreover, it functions as its own cohesive and compelling narrative, while the more recognizable Castlevania elements are set up for the twice as long upcoming Season 2. So really, it's not that nothing happened. Plenty did. It's just that they didn't get to the castle yet. And yes, I wanted that too, but still, what we got was plenty entertaining in its own right. And that's really all the important stuff I wanted to talk about. Characters were fleshed out and cool, setting was cool, and though it was short, every minute of this first season was engrossing. Frankly, I'm hyped as fuck for more. If I could just add one thing to the show though, just a hint of some of the game's tunes, please? That'd be nice. Thanks for sitting through my ramblings about a kick-ass cartoon. Leave a comment if you want to say anything. Believe it or not, I do enjoy reading every single one I get. Stick around if you enjoyed this, there's more where it came from on its way. Thanks again for watching, and now if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go see if there are any anime on this season worth watching. Maybe make a video about it. See you later.